In this video, we are going to learn how to perform a nearby search using the Places library, which is part of the Google Maps JavaScript library. So a nearby search means that we're going to be looking for specific establishments like stores or hotels around a specific location that we will define ourselves. Okay, so let's go to our FTP and create a new file and call it nearby search.php. Okay, and let's open the file using brackets. Let's copy the code from the previous file. Okay, and we're going to keep only the code we used to create the map. Let's save and let's open our page. Okay, let's change the title to nearby search. Okay, and also let's delete the input and the button. Okay, so what we'd like to do, we would like to look for stores around London in a specific radius. Okay, so once we load the page, this is what we're going to get. Okay, so before you perform a nearby search, you would need to make sure that you've got a map on your website. Okay, otherwise you would need to show the logo powered by Google. Okay, and you can download the logo from the Google Map development website by going to the development website and then /documentation /JavaScript places. Okay, so to start, we are going to define a request. So to define a request, we will need a location. Okay, and that location needs to be defined using a function latitude longitude. Okay, so the location must be defined using this function, which is google.maps.latitude longitude. Okay, so let's define a location. I'm going to call it London. Okay, and we're going to use this function, which will take a couple of parameters, the latitude and the longitude. So for London, we're going to go for 51.1 and or 55.5 and minus 0.1. Okay, and then we're going to define our request, which is going to be an object. So the first option is going to be our location, which is the variable we just defined there. And then we can define a radius. Okay, and let's go for 500. Okay, and finally we need the types of the establishments that we are looking for, and in our case we're looking for stores. Okay, so between brackets and single quotes, I'm going to write store. Okay, so now we are looking for places or stores around London in a radius of 500 meters. Okay, now we need to pass our request to a function called nearby search. Okay, so this function is a method of a places services object that we need to define first before we use that function. So what we're going to do now, we're going to create a places service object, okay, before we use that function. Okay, so let's call this object service. Okay, so we're going to use a constructor google.maps.places.places service, and it's going to take one parameter here, which is our map object, okay, which is that one. Now we are ready to use the method, okay. So we'll use the object and then the method nearby search. So this method is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first one is our request, as we defined there, and the second parameter is a callback function, okay, that is going to be executed once we get data back. Okay, so the function nearby search is going to return an array of objects or place result objects. Okay, so now let's define our callback function. So this function is going to show what we're going to do with the results. Okay, so it's going to take a couple of parameters. So the first one is going to be the result of our request, and we're expecting an array of objects, okay, and the second one is the status of our request, okay. So to start, let's just make sure that the status is okay. So we're going to check if it's okay, and if it's fine, we are just going to print this results variable in our console and just see what it's got inside. So if the status is okay, so to check if it's okay, we're going to check if it's equal to google.maps.places.places service status dot okay. So if that's the case, we are going to print the results in our console. So let's save and check this. Okay, we don't need that input. Also, we need to add the places library when we embed our Google Maps JavaScript API. So to do that, we're going to add another parameter after an ampersand. So it's going to be libraries equal places. Now let's save and refresh our page. So if we click on F12 to see the console, then we can see our results there. So it's an array. So in this scenario, it's got 20 elements inside. Each element is an object. So if we check any of these, you're going to find various bits of information. So for example, we've got the geometry of the place, and then inside we've got the location, okay, which will give us both the latitude and longitude values. You've got other bits like the name of the place. Now we are going to cycle through all these objects or places and add a corresponding marker for each one on our map. So to do this, we are going to use a for loop. Okay. And then we're going to use a function that we can define later, add marker. So you're going to apply this function to each of these elements. So to access each of these elements, we're going to use the results array and then an index I. Okay, so for I starting at 0, which is the first element, we're going to continue until I is equal to the length of the array -1. So that's why we've got strictly less than, and every time we increment I by 1. Okay, now let's define our function. So this function is going to add a marker for each place in the results array. So it's going to take one parameter, and let's call it place. This corresponds to one of these objects. So to create the marker, we're going to use a variable marker, and then we're going to use the constructor marker of the Google Maps. Okay, so inside the constructor we're going to place the options of the marker. So first of all, we're going to set the map option using our map object. Then for the position, we are going to use the location option of geometry. So first we're going to access the object, okay, which is the place corresponding to one of these objects, and then we're going to go to the geometry option, and then inside we're going to go to the location option. Okay, and this is going to return an object containing the latitude and longitude. And then let's add some animation to our marker. So you're going for a drop animation, so the value is google.maps.animation with capital A .drop capital letters. Okay, now let's save this and refresh. Okay, so we need to change the zoom level so that we can see the markers clearly. Okay, so let's go back to the zoom property and change that to 15. Let's refresh again. Okay, now we can see our markers clearly. Now what we need to do is we want to be able to click on each of these markers and see the name of the place. Okay, so to do this, we are going to create an info window at the beginning of our code, and whenever we click on one of these markers, we're going to show that info window and just change its content to the name of the place. Okay, so let's create our info window just after creating the map. So we're going to call it info window, and we're going to use the constructor info window. So we're going to use the keyword new and then google.maps.info window. Okay, now right after creating the marker, we are going to add a listener to our map using the add listener method. So this listener is going to execute some code once we click on the marker. So the syntax is google.maps.event.add listener with capital L. So this method is going to take a few parameters. So the first parameter is the marker. The second parameter is the event, in our case it's click. And the last parameter is the function to execute once we click on the marker. Okay. So what we want to do, first of all, we are going to change the content of our info window, okay, before we open the info window. So to do that, we're gonna use the info window variable, and we're going to use a method set content. So the contents of the info window is going to be the name of the place. And if we check our console, the place is one of these objects, okay, remember? And the name is going to be one of its options, name. So it's going to be place, okay, dot name. Then once we change the contents of the info window, now we are ready to open the info window. And to open it, we are going to use the open method, which takes two parameters. The first one is the map object. Okay, in our case it's map. And the second parameter is the marker. So in our case it's the marker that we clicked. So we can use the keyword this because we clicked on that marker. So let's save and refresh the page. Now we can see our markers. If we click on any of them, we can see the name of the place. Okay. In the next video, we are going to get introduced to the autocomplete feature, which will help the user fill in location inputs.